the question that we're going to start with is, witchcraft. What is witchcraft? Is there witchcraft? Maybe in the 16th century, where people didn't know better, and they thought that late night storms could be conjured up, it's one thing. But in the year 2022, for it to still be on the criminal agenda, how are we supposed to understand that? And in particular, these witch trials and executions resonated with a pasuk in this week's parsha, source number 2, Mechashefa lo sichayeh. You shall not let a witch live. Who's the witch? Which witch? Is it only a female witch? What about warlocks? It's something which seems more science fiction, maybe in the realm of Harry Potter. In fact, some of the translations of this verse are not, you shall not let a witch live, but you shall not let a witch, it translates the word techaya, you should not let a witch have any standing. The idea that it's not about life in the physical sense, but you shouldn't give them a pulpit, as it were, in an opportunity to try and influence people. But what's going on? Do people believe in witchcraft? Do they really still believe in witchcraft today? We can understand, more primitive societies without access to technology. But, we live in an era, as Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein famously commented, once upon a time when people were sick, you had to appeal to God only. There was no medicine. Nowadays, when people are sick, you call the doctor and you say to him. So how do we to understand this? So this is the headline today. Questions, comments, reactions to this story. Anyone ever encounter a witch trial? Okay, good. Hopefully no one's ever been accused of being a witch. So let's try to understand, what is this, what about the Mechashefa? What about that biblical witch? And what about witchcraft and sorcery as a sin, or as having any type of reality or not? So Rashi says about this pasuk about not letting a witch live, this does not mean you can kill her, but she can be put to death by the court. And he says both men and women practice witchcraft are included in this law, but in using the feminine form of mechashefa, scripture speaks of what is usually the case. It is women who mostly practice witchcraft, says the Talmud in Sanhedrin. Okay, right, that's the idea of, when we envision witches, they're generally women. That seems to have been a cultural and societal connection that dates back to ancient times. So, according to Rashi, we're worried about witchcraft. We're worried about people utilizing witchcraft, and therefore they have to be charged in Beit Din and then would be put to death if the Beit Din finds them guilty. We know separately that the Beit Din generally did not execute all that often. So that's just something to keep in mind. Maybe that's the difference between the Salem witch trials and the Scottish witch trials. In Salem, there was only, far fewer executed. Maybe they had more Talmudic standards for imposing the death penalty. But for Rashi, this is a capital offense. So Rav Shmuel David Luzzatto, who was an Italian Torah commentary in the 18th century, points out that this takes a little bit more of a rationalist approach to this. And Shadal says, what's going on? Why is the witch or guilty or liable? So it's not because of witchcraft. Luzzatto says in source number 4, Ki kol mechashefu oved avodah zara. No, if someone is involved in what they're calling witchcraft, they're really idolaters. And he invokes the Rambam on this, the Rambam in his Guide to the Perplexed. He's also trying to convince others to worship Avodah Zarah or recognize the power of Avodah Zarah, of idolatry. This is not about witchcraft. This is about a bad apple. And this is about a bad apple spoiling all the other apples in the basket. And so we begin to see that the appearance of two general views that are taken when it comes to witchcraft or sorcery. One, it's something serious and it's something to be taken seriously and it can be a crime, and whether or not it ends up in execution is up to Beis Din, the rabbinical courts. The other approach is that, no, this is really symbolic of someone who's involved in something far different. It's a nefarious effort on the part of someone who worships idols to turn and to influence the rest of society to follow in his nefarious ways. And we're going to see that this approach, when it comes to the mechashefa, to the witch, and to this specific biblical admonition, is also the way we see various approaches to the dark side of things when it comes to black magic and sorcery and the like in general. Questions or comments before we go any further?
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yesterday,
Yes.
President Biden called a reporter for the Fox News a son of a witch. And I know that 80% of the members of the synagogue watch Fox. So I imagine they would probably be very irate with such a condemnation.
I'm not sure. Something tells me probably I didn't see that. I don't really have time to watch the news during the day. Also, it's bad for my blood pressure. But it's the idea of probably trying to imply something else. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure any news channel or political party has a monopoly on witches or other other types of activity. But in this case, what does it mean to be a witch? I still remember in grade school there was the spelling sentence. If you had to keep track of which witch is which, right? So we're just here talking about the WITCH, and it seems that there is an approach. All right, we know what a witch is. If someone's involved in witchcraft, they are held. They are criminally detained and brought to the Beit Din and potentially executed. And we have the other approach, the more rationalist approach, represented by Shadal or Shmuel David Luzzatto. I know this is all about idolatry. This is all about an individual trying to divert the attention of the Jewish people to turn them away from God into other activities. And so where this comes up with regards to magic and sorcery is with the sorcerers of Pharaoh. It's kind of, a headline to see, because when looking into, when Pharaoh called his sorcerers to perform the plagues that Moshe and Aaron were doing and showing the miracles, right? Moshe and Aaron came with a staff, they cast the staff down, it turned into a snake, and then the Egyptian sorcerers did the same thing. And then famously, the Moshe staff snake slurped up all the others, and that showed that Moshe's miracle was more, was a higher level. It said that the sorcerer were able to conjure up blood and frogs as well. So what was their power? So when we look at the power, the Ramban Nachmanides, his commentary of this story, Surah 5, rabbis have said that these are deeds of sorcerers who perform their arts through angels of destruction. Okay, there's a dark side. Pharaoh called for wise men and the sorcerers, for the wise men who knew the art of encanting and assembling the demons were the leaders and the elders of the Egyptians. These are the term Chartumei Mitzrayim includes the wise men and the sorcerers. So the Ramban is calling upon a rabbinic tradition found in the Gemara and Sanhedrin, similar to Rashi with regard to the witch, in which there is power on the dark side. Kind of, it has a little bit of a Star Wars theme to it. You have the force and you have the dark side. So here you have the dark side. There is a dark side. And there are those who know how to manipulate the dark side. Those who manipulate the dark side, among those were the sorcerers of Egypt. There were the Chartumim. They had read the books and they knew how to use this. Kind of these ancient wise beings who were able to invoke the power of the dark side and able to conjure up snakes and blood and frogs and the like. Weren't able to do everything. Even the Egyptian sorcerers were stymied by trying to create the plague of lice. But that's what you have. You have a dark side. You have a dark side of things. Ibn Ezra, in discussing the sorcerers, says, no, this is not black magic. This is not dark power. This is source number 6, those who appear to change natural law. Emphasis on appear. This is not the dark forces that people can conjure up. This is sleight of hand. This is, This is kind of David Copperfield magic. This is the the type of tricks and illusions that we see performed today. That's what this is about. This is not about any type of power that exists out there. And this is a similar conversation that takes place when people talk about good and evil. What is evil? Is evil the absence of God's involvement, or is there a dark satanic realm that exists? And this is also something that emerges within the rabbinic literature, and in particular in Kabbalistic literature, as a whole extension of this type of black magic into the dark forces, into evil. And the other side of things is, no, there can't be evil. There's only one God who's all powerful. There's no competing evil interests. And therefore, it's just appears different, or it's God being less involved and to be able to magic. They're really just what person. This is why, for example, the Rambam, when talking about idolatry in general, right? Getting to this realm, is idolatry real? And my mind, he says no. Source number 7: all of these things are false and spurious, and it is with such that the ancient idolaters misled the peoples of many lands so they'd be following them. It is unbecoming to Israel, who are exceedingly wise, to be attracted by these absurdities, nor to even imagine that they're of any consequence. Even as it is said, for there is no enchantment with Jacob, there is no divination with Israel. It is again stated, for these nations that thou art to dispossess, hearken unto soothsayers, unto diviners. But as for thee, the Lord thy God has not suffered thee to do so. Right? They're involved in this mishagas. Well, no, we believe in God. Whosoever believes in these matters and their like, and suppose that there is wisdom and truth in them, save what the Torah disallowed them, such are none other save from among the foolish and ignorant, are to be included among women and children whose mind is not sound. Maimonides is talking the language of his day, thinking that men were more intelligent and more rational than women and children. But wise and sound-minded people know that all these matters which the Torah disallowed are not matters of wisdom, but formless nonsense, followed by senseless people, for the sake of which they abandoned every path of truth, even because the Torah is admonishing against all these vanities. Because the Torah says, "Tamim tiyeh Hashem Elokecha," perfect shall thou be with the Lord thy God. So Maimonides says idolatry is fake. Idolatry is an illusion. Idolatry is for the simple-minded folk. Idolatry is something where people are easily conned into believing it. That's what it's all about. It's a plot by people who want to convince others that they have conduits to power, so they tell them, worship my idols. The answer is no. That's not how it works. And the Rambam is really exactly is the foundation upon which the Ibn Ezra is built. Sorcerers, no, they're performing illusions. It's magic tricks, right? They make you think there's nothing up their sleeve, and then they pull out a snake from a staff, or they pull out to turn water into blood, or they conjure up frogs. Right? This is something that appeals. This idea of being able to sleight of hand. Whether it be magic tricks, Harry Houdini, the one today, Blaine. David Blaine, all these different things that people do, they seem to break through natural limits, and it's something that is appealing. So this is nothing new. According to the Rambam, this is what idolatry always was, trying to impress trying to impress the audience with the powers of idolatry, to seduce them to worship the idols. That's what it's always been about. And now things have changed a little bit. We don't necessarily believe in idolatry as gods, but the same thing is with regards to magic. So much so that there's a whole discussion with regards to the propriety of magic, right? If this is meant to be foolishness, then pulling the rabbit out of the hat, is there a prohibition involved in that? Is something that is discussed in Jewish law. But we see with regards to just as there were two different approaches to what it means for a witch to be liable for the death penalty. Is it real witchcraft and it's a real offense, or is it idolatry? That's something that is expressed in a larger discussion as to whether or not there are dark forces out there. And according to the Ramban, which it is based on rabbinic tradition, it's dark forces, and people can sometimes take control of them. For example, that's what Bilam, the wicked Bilam, did in being able to curse people, he was able to figure out when's the right time. He was able to take control of those dark forces, as an example, and he was able to, use those dark forces and make things happen. Or is it, as the Rambam is talking about, is this really, Ibn Ezra and other more rationalists, is this really just parlor tricks, smoke and mirrors and the like? And nevertheless, is this something that becomes still problematic to engage in, because it's close to being like witchcraft? What about the role of magicians? So there have been different approaches to this throughout halachic literature, but there really is, kind of a question, how are the people responding? So that's the approach to black magic. Questions or comments? Anyone want to perform any magic tricks? Okay. So the Rambam mentions something, and it's clear from the way the Rambam mentions it that he has a certain expectation for kind of the elevated intellectual status of the Jewish person who's not supposed to believe in this, for lack of a better term, nourishkeit, right? This mishagas, this foolishness. And he talks about the wise and sound-minded people know that this is all fake. So there's a law in Shulchan Aruch that people sometimes develop certain practices when getting injured. This is something that the Talmud talks about, for specifically lochesh al hamaka. Someone gets wounded, they would like say something. They would say like a little incantation. So the Shulchan Aruch mentions someone who has been bitten by a scorpion, it is permitted to whisper spells for them even on Shabbat. Right, Shabbat, we generally don't engage in medical practices unless it's an emergency. But here you're allowed to whisper the spells. And even though this thing is completely ineffective, because the person is in danger, they permitted it in order that they not be driven mad. Right, the idea, we're worried about the mental state of a person, and people have gotten used to these type of superstitions and these type of responses to superstitions. So even though Shamaka is something that's absolutely prohibited, it has a certain calming effect on the injured person, we'll let it slide. Right, and someone will say, well, if it's a danger, can you do anything? Well, when there's a danger, you can do anything, but you can't do idol worship. So it seems that Shulchan Aruch combines both the idea of people who engage in this behavior, but recognizing it doesn't work, but it still might make people feel better. It's almost kind of like this idea of, how do we respond to superstitions? Broken mirrors, walking under a ladder, black cats, these types of things. In this case in particular, was a certain procedure to whisper over. And even though it was a prohibited activity, even though it doesn't work, we're put the mind that just let it go, we'll let it slide. This idea of it doesn't work, but if it makes the person feel a little bit better, it's not completely prohibited to do it in this type of a situation. And in some ways, like, look at the Shulchan Aruch and kind of dismiss it. Like, what's the big deal? It's something silly if the person likes that superstition, and what's the big deal? But the halacha, but Jewish law is very discouraging of engaging in this behavior. And this is the type of behavior that can get a witch killed. Here we're kind of allowing it because it makes the person feel a little bit better.
No picture.
No sound.
This
No
is psychosomatic.
sound.
This is psychosomatic. Why are we concerned? Why is the Shulchan Aruch concerned in this case? So why aren't we concerned in this case? And so the answer would seem to be that it is the Rambam's view that these things are worthless and foolishness which carries the day, and kind of bridging it from the biblical times where the witch can't live, and to the time of today where we're saying that we'll let people engage in it just because. Seems to a bridge to that is found in Rabbi Yisrael Lifshitz, author of the Tiferes Yisrael commentary on the Mishnah. He had two different commentaries, Yachin and Boaz. Those are the names of the pillars in the temple. And in his Boaz commentary in Sanhedrin, which is talking about the capital offense of engaging in witchcraft, right? We said before, you have to go to the courts to be tried for witchcraft, right? You don't get burned at the stake. There is an execution if you're able to be found guilty, which hardly ever happened. But he says that with regards to this, with regards to witchcraft, and this is in Hebrew in source number 9, we'll translate it. I really have to point out, I have to let it be known that what the Rabbi Shmuel Al-Ghazi wrote several hundred years ago, so Rabbi Lifshitz is in the 1800s, so he's quoting someone from the 1600s, who basically says the following. It's now further on in history, Acharit Hayamim, right? We're now at a period, we're living in a time where there's essentially monotheism is the dominant type of belief, right? This is a conversation we've had with regards to, the fact that, the religions are not necessarily as idolatrous as they used to be. Christianity and Islam are essentially monotheist. So it's the monotheistic attitude has dominated. People recognize there is God and there are no. This idea of sorcery, of witchcraft, of black magic is a phenomenon that has come on. The sun has set on it. And it's already disappeared. And we don't have anything, we don't have practitioners of this type of in depth. Could be once upon a time, there were magicians. Maybe the sorcerers in Egypt were real sorcerers, but now everything is rational. There's no one anymore who has magic or witch sorcery. It's only foolish people who think that there's actually real forces of evil. And he says, anyone who says, you might find people who will say, Kach shamati, I've heard this, second line from the bottom of the source. No one will ever say, I saw magic performed, real, genuine magic. And basically, it's all illusion, right? And it's vanity. And he says this is what was written 200 years ago. So this idea that the Pharisees introduced that, look, people may have been more gullible, people may have been more believing in other forces to try and find, to make sense of the world. But we live in an age where things are much more rational. Right? We know that magicians can't make rabbits appear out of hats. We know that it's an illusion. And so, I think that when the Shulchan Aruch is saying that a prohibited activity is something that will let it slide because of the fact it makes someone feel a little bit better, it's because of the fact that things, we do look at times having changed. Already the Rambam was very strongly adamant that people should take a rationalist approach to life. Okay, the times of the Rambam, 12th, 13th century, the elites were on that level, but the average person may not have been there. By the time you get to the 16th, 17th century, 18th century, 19th century, everybody knows that there's an illusion. Everyone knows that there are no power. There are no evil powers out there. And if there were evil powers, says Rabbi Lifshitz, that was then. We don't see that anymore. And people will say, "Oh, I heard about this ritual performed, somewhere deep in the jungle. They made something happen." No, no one's ever seen it. You've heard the stories about it, and it's like on some of these reality TV, they have secrets of the paranormal. And this is all smoke and mirrors. But the attitude of this being real is certainly something which did exist and could have existed for many years, but it's not accurate. Questions or comments on this line of thinking? It puts it in a different light, the fact that in the 16th century, they were still executing thousands of witches.
I have a comment. Often we take children, religious children, to magic shows and things like that, and have their birthday parties and Pesach programs, and they are naive. They think it's real. They think it's real magic. Is that in your opinion a mistake? Is that poor education of?
Right. So I would say some feel it is, and some do.
Lost you.
Losing your sound.
That's one way of evading the answer.
Doesn't want me to answer that question. So I don't know what dark force interfered there, but so there are some restrictive forces that would prohibit those types of activities. It would not allow those magic shows to be part of a quote unquote kosher entertainment. But I think that this approach that's introduced into the Pharisee soil, and that's that's highlighting the fact that essentially, especially in these times, we don't give credence to these types of powers, would allow it. In fact, there are these types of direct questions were addressed by some of the rabbis, some of the poskim, and they permit that type of activity because as long as we continue to promote that, we know that Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere. Then that suffices for creating the right educational background that these types of entertainment are just are fake.
Lost the sound.
And so it's a valid point that this could be a slippery slope. Any other questions?
Rabbi, have you ever seen a witch? I
So I just
haven't.
wanted to conclude. If you haven't, then I certainly haven't, because you've been around a little bit longer than I have. But
Never saw
look,
one.
it's clear that this is something that this captures the human imagination, the human attention. We're seeking, and sometimes it's easier for people to settle upon questions and charge. So I apologize for some technical difficulties today, but I want to conclude with another. It was actually a recent. Of the Jewish. The source number, it is also, it's fairly recent from October, it's past October. There are spooky supernatural world also has a long history in Judaism. And modern Jewishes are encouraging the connection through their practices, often slightly different from their non-Jewish contemporaries. I do not burn sage, said Zoe Jacoby, who runs Jewishes, a popular blog and podcast, but Jews had crystals. Actually, they were called gems. Jacoby and her peers are revitalizing ancient Jewish practices of witchcraft, which have been seen something of a revival as of late. Far from having an easy relationship with magic practitioners, Judaism, or at least Kabbalistic strands of it, has long embraced them. Many Jewish rituals today have their roots in warding off demons, ghosts, and other mythological creatures. When we break the glass at a wedding,
Oy.
scaring off evil spirits, as ancient Jews believed that the mezuzah protected them from messengers of evil, a function parallel to that of an amulet or a good luck charm. And then you see in source number 11, the Rambam actually mentioning this idea. And the Rambam talks about the fact that our mezuzahs, we write the word Shaddai on the outer scroll. And for many, this is reflected in the shin on the case, right? And he says that this is okay. It's written on the outside. It's not actionable. However, people write the names of angels, holy names of biblical texts or inscriptions usual on seals within the mezuzah, or among those who have no portion of the world to come. But these fools not only fail to fulfill the commandment, but they treat and as an amulet for their own personal interests. according to their foolish minds, the mezuzah is something that will secure for them advantage in the vanities of the world. So the Rambam quotes this idea that people misuse the mezuzah as an amulet to ward off evil spirits, as was mentioned in the article. And the Jew witches seize upon that. And the Rambam is there. They're seizing on something that has been something that people have misused since the times of the Rambam. And the Rambam is saying that's terrible. You have no share in the world to come. Now some of the commentaries on the Rambam point out that you have to hold on a second, because we know in Jewish tradition the mezuzah is there, and this is source number 12, that the mezuzah is there to protect the house. That concept does exist. So we see the Rambam is getting very heated up over a subject which is really, he has no right to get upset about. The Gemara talks about the mezuzah as protection. Here the Rambam is saying people use it as protection, have no share in the world to come. It's very, it's very much a slippery slope. And so, while we started by pointing out that yes, witches cannot live and witchcraft and sorcery is a capital offense, once we dig a little bit more deeply down into it, is it really because of the power of the dark forces, or is it because it's the type of behavior which seems to move people away from the proper approach to God's running of the world and following foolishness? So you had the Talmudic rabbinic approach does introduce this as having power. We see Rashi, we see Ramban basing it on that. And then we feel that this is the type of behavior that's just leading people astray. Shadal, Ibn Ezra, the Rambam, and recognizing that throughout history, there's kind of been an accommodation. We know this is fake. We still discourage it. We let people engage in it somewhat because of the fact that we know it's foolishness, but it might make people feel better. We live in an age where people know better, so no one will ever really think the rabbit's coming out of the hat. But there is this tension that has always existed, because the Jewishes will say, look, we have this in our tradition. And they're not wrong. And it's because of that slippery slope that the Rambam in particular, in that example of the mezuzah, took on this practice of using the mezuzah as an amulet is a terrible thing. But still, there is that sense that this idea of witches having any type of real energy or power is not the case, or certainly for Rabbi Lifshitz is no longer the case. What would Jews do about witches? Well, we would back in the day silence them. It'd probably be very hard to execute them, so we wouldn't have to pardon them. But it is a subject that if it's not black magic, it is steeped in a little bit of mystery in terms of how to approach it. And for the most part, it's generally been, when we are secure in our connection and our faith and our approach to faith, to be able to teach faith, we feel better about it. When people try to use the dark forces in rabbinic statements to try and create a different kind of Judaism, then like the Rambam with mezuzahs and some of the traditional rabbis with the Jewishes, we try to shut it down. So I would say that the people's participation in magic is maybe not the best. Is not the best job for a Jewish boy, although Harry Houdini was and his father was a rabbi, but it doesn't seem to be anything that's prohibited. And really, this topic can be used as a springboard to trying to engage in matters of faith. Miriam before asked the question about children. It's an educable opportunity to be able to speak to them about that. What you're seeing may seem very impressive, but it shows what people are able to do by whether it be the sleight of hand, or whether it be certain talents that they have and being able to do things quickly to entertain. But the slippery slope is still out there, and some of the views about opening ourselves up to this type of an experience for some still smacks of the prohibition of Mechashefa. And so as usual, lots to talk about, no clear determinations other than Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. How's that for a conclusion? Again, I apologize to the